Most people think they understand strength. They think strength is being loud, being dominant, being impossible to ignore. But some of the strongest people in the world operate differently. They listen more than they speak. They observe more than they react. And because of that, they are often underestimated. These are the people we commonly call empaths. Now let's be clear about something. An empath is not someone who is simply emotional. An empath is someone who pays attention. They notice shifts in behavior. They detect inconsistencies in communication. They recognize emotional patterns that most people overlook. And this creates a fascinating psychological phenomenon. Because empaths are usually patient, people assume they can be treated carelessly. People believe they can take more than they give, ignore boundaries, dismiss concerns, break trust repeatedly, and nothing will happen. This is where the mistake begins. The first misunderstanding is assuming kindness equals weakness. Think about that. Anyone can be rude. Anyone can lose control. Anyone can react impulsively. But it takes discipline to remain calm when disappointed. It takes maturity to choose understanding over retaliation. It takes strength to give people the benefit of the doubt. What many people call softness is often self-control. And self-control is power. The second mistake people repeat is confusing silence with ignorance. When an empath stays quiet, many assume they don't notice what's happening. That assumption is usually wrong. Empaths often notice far more than they discuss. They see the changes in effort, the shifts in tone, the inconsistencies between words and actions. But instead of reacting immediately, they gather information. They watch, they learn, they wait. Not because they are powerless, because they value accuracy over emotion. And this patience creates an illusion. Others begin to believe there are no consequences. Until one day there are. Here's something important to understand. The breaking point of an empath rarely looks dramatic. There is often no argument, no public confrontation, no emotional explosion. Instead, something much more significant happens. They stop investing. The attention disappears. The support disappears. The emotional availability disappears. And suddenly, people discover what they had only after it is gone. Why does this happen so often? Because human psychology has a tendency to normalize value. When something is consistently available, we begin to expect it. When someone is consistently supportive, we start treating that support as ordinary. The mind adapts. Appreciation decreases. Entitlement increases. And eventually, people stop recognizing the contribution being made until the contribution is removed. Then reality becomes impossible to ignore. The person who always listened is no longer listening. The person who always understood is no longer understanding. The person who always showed up is no longer there. And that's when the lesson arrives, not through punishment, but through absence. Another reason hurting an empath is such a common mistake is that people focus on what empaths tolerate rather than what they value. Empaths often tolerate mistakes. They understand human imperfection. They know everyone struggles. But understanding someone does not mean accepting unlimited disrespect. Compassion has boundaries. Patience has limits. Trust has conditions. And once those limits are crossed repeatedly, the relationship changes. Not because the empath becomes cruel, because they become clear. Clarity is one of the most powerful transformations a person can experience. The moment someone clearly understands their worth, their behavior changes, their standards change, their boundaries change, their decisions change. And people who benefited from the old version often struggle to accept the new one. That's why the final stage surprises so many people. They expect another chance, another explanation, another warning, another opportunity. Instead, they encounter distance, not anger, distance. Because by that point, the empath has already learned the lesson. The trust that took years to build was weakened one choice at a time, and rebuilding it is no longer their responsibility. The deeper lesson here is not about empaths, it's about human behavior. We often underestimate what is consistent. We overlook what is reliable. We take for granted what feels permanent, and then we act surprised when it disappears. The truth is simple. People rarely regret hurting someone during the moment they do it. They regret it when they finally understand what they lost. And that understanding usually arrives too late. So if there is one lesson to remember, it is this. Never mistake patience for weakness. Never mistake kindness for lack of strength. And never assume that someone who gives endlessly will continue giving forever. Because the strongest people are often the ones who remain calm the longest. And when they finally walk away, they rarely look back. Most people think they understand strength. But what they often recognize as strength is only the visible, obvious version of it. They associate power with loud voices, strong opinions, dominance, control, and the ability to command attention in a room. Society frequently rewards people who appear confident, assertive, and impossible to ignore. So many grow up believing that the strongest individuals are the ones who can overwhelm others with their presence. However, there is another form of strength that is much quieter and far less understood. It does not demand attention, yet it influences everything around it. It is the strength of emotional awareness, self-control, and deep understanding. This is why so many people misjudge empaths. Because empaths are often patient, compassionate, and willing to listen, others assume they are fragile or easy to take advantage of. They see kindness and mistake it for weakness. They see forgiveness and mistake it for a lack of standards. They see calmness and mistake it for an inability to fight back. What they fail to recognize is that genuine empathy requires a level of emotional discipline that many people never develop. It takes strength to remain composed when others are disrespectful. It takes strength to understand someone else's pain while managing your own. It takes strength to listen without immediately judging, attacking, or defending. An empath is not simply someone who feels emotions deeply. An empath is someone who pays attention to what others overlook. They notice changes in behavior, shifts in tone, inconsistencies between words and actions, and subtle emotional signals that reveal what people are truly thinking or feeling. While others focus only on what is being said, empaths often notice what is not being said. This heightened awareness allows them to understand situations on a deeper level, but it also causes many people to underestimate them. Because empaths do not always react immediately, some assume they are unaware of what is happening. In reality, the opposite is usually true. They are often gathering information, observing patterns, and trying to understand the full picture before making a judgment. Their silence is not ignorance, it is observation. Their patience is not weakness, it is restraint. Many people become comfortable taking advantage of this patience because they mistake tolerance for acceptance. They believe that because an empath continues to show kindness, there will never be consequences for disrespectful behavior. Over time, they begin to push boundaries, ignore feelings, and take emotional support for granted. The mistake becomes larger with each repeated action, because the empath often gives multiple opportunities for change. They understand that people make mistakes, have bad days, and struggle with personal issues. However, understanding someone does not mean allowing endless mistreatment. Every person, no matter how compassionate, has limits. The difference is that an empath's limit is often reached quietly. Instead of dramatic confrontations or emotional outbursts, they simply reach a point where they recognize that their energy is being invested in the wrong place. Once that realization becomes clear, their behavior changes. The support that was once freely given becomes unavailable. The attention that was once constant begins to fade. The emotional investment that others relied upon slowly disappears. This transformation surprises people because they expected endless patience. They believed the empath would always be there, always forgive, and always understand. What they fail to realize is that true strength includes knowing when to stop giving to those who no longer value what is being given. By the time others recognize this change, they often discover that the person they underestimated was one of the most valuable people in their life all along. One of the biggest misunderstandings people have is believing that kindness automatically means weakness. This belief causes countless individuals to underestimate those who choose compassion over conflict and patience over immediate reaction. When someone is consistently understanding, supportive, and willing to see the good in others, many assume that person lacks the strength to stand up for themselves. In reality, the opposite is often true. It is easy to become angry, easy to criticize, and easy to react emotionally in difficult situations. What is difficult is maintaining self-control when disappointment, betrayal, or disrespect occurs. People who possess deep empathy often understand this better than anyone. They recognize that every action has a reason, every behavior has a cause, and every person carries struggles that are not always visible on the surface. Because of this understanding, they frequently give others chances that most people would never offer. They forgive mistakes, overlook flaws, and try to see potential where others only see problems. Unfortunately, this generosity is often misinterpreted. Instead of appreciating the patience being offered, some people begin to expect it. Instead of valuing the understanding they receive, they start treating it as something ordinary. Human nature has a tendency to take consistent value for granted. When someone repeatedly provides support, encouragement, and emotional stability, People become accustomed to receiving it without considering the effort behind it. Over time, appreciation can slowly turn into entitlement. Small acts of disrespect become more common, boundaries are ignored, and promises are broken because there is an assumption that forgiveness will always be available. Yet every action leaves an impression, and every repeated behavior creates a pattern. While others may believe nothing is being noticed, those who are highly aware are often observing far more than they reveal. They pay attention to how people act when they no longer need something, how they behave when no one is watching, and whether their actions consistently match their words. Their understanding of people comes not from assumptions but from observation. Because they value accuracy over emotional reactions, they often spend a long time analyzing situations before making decisions. This patience creates the illusion that there are no consequences for poor behavior, but the truth is that they are simply collecting evidence before reaching a conclusion. The moment that conclusion is reached, everything changes in a way that many people never expect. Contrary to popular belief, the strongest response is not always confrontation. Sometimes the most powerful action is withdrawal. When someone finally realizes that their kindness is being mistaken for weakness, and their loyalty is being taken for granted, they stop investing their energy where it is no longer respected. This shift rarely arrives with dramatic announcements or emotional scenes. Instead, it happens quietly. The conversations become shorter, the effort becomes smaller, and the emotional availability that once seemed endless begins to disappear. Those who benefited from that support often fail to notice the change at first, because they have become so accustomed to receiving it. But eventually, the absence becomes impossible to ignore. The encouragement that was always there is no longer present. The understanding that once made difficult situations easier is gone. The person who consistently offered patience and compassion is no longer willing to carry the emotional weight of a one-sided relationship. This is usually the point when regret appears. People begin to realize that what they considered ordinary was actually rare. They recognize that trust, loyalty, and genuine emotional support are not resources that can be endlessly consumed without appreciation. The lesson arrives not through punishment but through loss. The absence of something valuable often teaches more than its presence ever could. This is why so many people repeat the same mistake. They focus on what someone tolerates instead of recognizing what that person contributes. They become distracted by the calm exterior and fail to see the strength required to maintain it. What they eventually learn is that patience has limits, understanding has boundaries, and even the most compassionate person will eventually choose self-respect over endless sacrifice. When that moment comes, the greatest consequence is not revenge, anger, or hostility. The greatest consequence is realizing too late that the support, trust, and loyalty they once had can no longer be taken for granted. Another mistake people frequently make is confusing silence with a lack of awareness. In a world where reactions are often immediate and emotions are displayed openly, many assume that someone who remains calm and quiet must not fully understand what is happening around them. This assumption can be incredibly misleading. Some of the most observant people are also the least reactive. Rather than responding to every situation the moment it occurs, they prefer to watch, listen, and gather information before reaching conclusions. They understand that first impressions can be deceptive, and that human behavior reveals itself through patterns over time. Because of this, they pay close attention to details that others overlook. They notice when enthusiasm suddenly disappears from a conversation, when promises are made but never fulfilled, and when actions repeatedly contradict words. These observations may seem small individually, but together they create a clear picture of someone's character and intentions. The interesting part is that most people never realize they are being observed in this way. They assume that if no complaint is being voiced, no concern exists. If no confrontation is happening, they believe no issue has been noticed. This misunderstanding often encourages careless behavior. People begin to believe they can continue crossing boundaries, breaking trust, or acting inconsistently without consequences. They mistake patience for blindness and restraint for weakness. What they fail to understand is that awareness does not always announce itself. Sometimes it works quietly in the background, collecting evidence and forming conclusions long before anyone else realizes a decision is being made. By the time many people recognize that their behavior has been noticed, the other person has already understood the situation more clearly than they ever imagined. This process of observation creates an important psychological advantage. Those who react immediately are often controlled by the emotions of the moment, while those who observe patiently gain access to a broader perspective. They are able to separate temporary mistakes from consistent habits and distinguish isolated incidents from recurring patterns. This is why they are often more difficult to deceive than people realize. They are not looking only at what someone says. They are paying attention to what someone repeatedly does. Over time, patterns become impossible to ignore. A single broken promise may be forgiven. A single moment of selfishness may be understood. A single misunderstanding may be explained away. However, repeated behavior tells a different story. Human beings reveal their priorities through consistency. What a person repeatedly chooses eventually becomes a reflection of who they are. Those who are highly observant understand this principle deeply. They know that trust is not damaged by one mistake alone, but by a series of choices that demonstrate a lack of respect, honesty, or consideration. As these patterns become clearer, their perception begins to change. They stop focusing on potential and start focusing on reality. They stop making excuses for behavior and begin evaluating actions as they truly are. This shift is significant because it marks the transition from hope to clarity. Hope often encourages people to overlook warning signs, while clarity forces them to acknowledge what has been present all along. Once clarity arrives, it becomes extremely difficult to return to previous assumptions. The reality that has been observed can no longer be ignored, and the relationship begins to change as a result. What makes this transformation so powerful is that it usually happens without dramatic conflict. Many expect major turning points in relationships to involve arguments, emotional outbursts, or visible confrontations. In reality, some of the most important decisions occur quietly. The decision to stop investing energy where it is not valued often happens internally long before it becomes visible externally. As understanding grows, priorities shift. Attention is redirected toward healthier environments, stronger relationships, and opportunities that provide mutual respect. The emotional energy that was once freely offered becomes protected rather than distributed without limits. To outsiders, this change can seem sudden, but it is rarely sudden at all. It is usually the result of countless observations accumulated over time. Every ignored boundary, every broken promise, every act of inconsideration contributes to a larger realization. When the realization finally becomes undeniable, the person who was once endlessly patient begins moving in a different direction. This is often when others become confused. They wonder why the connection feels different, why the support is no longer available, or why the closeness they once enjoyed has faded. What they do not see is that the change began long before the distance appeared. The visible outcome is simply the final stage of a process that has been developing for months or even years. The lesson is simple but powerful. Silence should never be mistaken for ignorance. Some people speak less because they are paying attention more. They understand that true knowledge comes from observation, not assumption, and that the most important truths about people are often revealed not through their words, but through the patterns they repeatedly choose to create. One of the most powerful lessons people eventually learn is that the greatest consequences in life rarely arrive through dramatic acts of revenge or confrontation. Instead, they often arrive through absence. Human beings have a remarkable ability to adapt to whatever is consistently available to them. When support is always present, it begins to feel normal. When understanding is always offered, it starts to feel expected. When someone repeatedly provides encouragement, patience, loyalty, and emotional stability, those qualities can gradually become invisible because they are no longer viewed as special. This is a psychological tendency that affects nearly everyone. The mind quickly adjusts to positive experiences and starts treating them as part of everyday life. As a result, appreciation often decreases over time unless it is intentionally maintained. This is why many people fail to recognize the true value of someone who consistently contributes to their emotional well-being. They become so focused on receiving that they stop noticing what is being given. What once felt extraordinary becomes ordinary, and what was once appreciated becomes assumed. This shift is subtle, but its effects can be significant. It creates an environment where effort is no longer acknowledged, sacrifices are overlooked, and emotional contributions are treated as if they require no energy. Over time, the imbalance grows. One person continues investing while the other becomes increasingly comfortable receiving. The relationship may appear stable on the surface, but beneath that surface, a gradual change is taking place. The person doing the giving begins to see the lack of reciprocity, the absence of appreciation, and the growing pattern of one-sided effort. They recognize that what they offer is being consumed rather than valued. This realization does not usually create immediate action, but it does plant a seed of awareness that continues to grow with every repeated experience. As this awareness develops, a deeper understanding begins to emerge. It becomes clear that relationships cannot thrive on generosity alone. While kindness can strengthen connections, it cannot sustain them if respect and appreciation are missing. Every healthy relationship requires a balance between giving and receiving. Without that balance, emotional exhaustion becomes inevitable. Many people believe that someone who is naturally compassionate will continue giving indefinitely regardless of how they are treated. This belief is one of the most common and costly mistakes people make. Compassion does not eliminate the need for boundaries. Understanding does not eliminate the need for respect. Patience does not eliminate the need for mutual effort. Eventually, every person reaches a point where they must decide whether their energy is being invested wisely. This decision is not driven by anger, but by clarity. Clarity allows people to see situations as they truly are, rather than as they wish them to be. It removes illusions and exposes patterns that have been hidden beneath hope and optimism. Once this level of understanding is reached, priorities begin to change. Instead of focusing on preserving relationships at any cost, attention shifts toward protecting emotional well-being. Energy is redirected toward people and environments that offer genuine appreciation and mutual respect. This shift can appear surprising to those who benefited from the previous dynamic, because they often assumed the situation would continue indefinitely. They believed the support would always be available, regardless of how little they contributed in return. When that support begins to fade, they are forced to confront a reality they never expected. Valuable things are not guaranteed simply because they have always been there. The absence of something meaningful often creates a level of understanding that its presence never could. While people are receiving support, they may fail to recognize its importance. Once that support disappears, however, its value becomes impossible to ignore. Conversations feel different. Challenges become harder to manage. The emotional stability that once seemed effortless is no longer available. Suddenly, what was taken for granted becomes deeply missed. This experience teaches an important truth about human nature. People often focus on what they have until it becomes familiar. Then they stop noticing it altogether. Only when it is gone do they fully understand its significance. This pattern repeats itself in friendships, families, workplaces, and personal relationships of every kind. The loss itself is not always what creates pain. Often, it is the realization that the loss could have been prevented. Regret grows when people recognize that opportunities for appreciation existed but were ignored. It grows when they understand that warnings were present but dismissed. It grows when they realize that consistent effort was mistaken for permanence. The emotional impact of this realization can be profound because it forces individuals to examine their own choices. Instead of blaming circumstances, they must confront the role their actions played in creating the outcome. This self-awareness can be uncomfortable, but it is also valuable because it creates the possibility for growth. The lessons learned through loss often become the lessons that shape future behavior. Ultimately, the deeper message extends beyond any single relationship. It is a reminder about how all meaningful connections should be treated. Every person who brings encouragement, loyalty, trust, and understanding into another person's life represents a form of value that should never be overlooked. These qualities are not unlimited resources. They require emotional effort, personal sacrifice, and a genuine willingness to care about someone else's well-being. When these contributions are recognized and appreciated, relationships become stronger and more resilient. When they are ignored, the foundation gradually weakens until the connection can no longer support itself. The most important realization is that respect should never begin after something valuable has been lost. Appreciation should exist while the opportunity still remains. Waiting until absence creates awareness often means waiting too long. The strongest relationships are not built on assumptions that someone will always stay. They are built on consistent gratitude, mutual effort, and recognition of each other's worth. People who understand this principle rarely experience the shock of losing something meaningful because they make appreciation a habit rather than an afterthought. They understand that every relationship is shaped by choices made day after day, and they recognize that the greatest mistake is not simply hurting someone who genuinely cared. It is failing to recognize their value while they were still standing beside you.